Yeah, thanks guys. It's an honour to be across here. The South Australian footy teams are out of the finals, and there's areas over home that's out of moisture for our crops. So everything's alive and well over here, which is, yeah, good to see. First thing, I guess, is you may be thinking, why is an agronomist from Yorke Peninsula over here? You know, that area's got nothing to do with me. As Peter said, look, what I'm going to present to you this morning is really to challenge you as farmers and agronomists in the way that you're thinking and tackling, I guess, a lot of your weed issues. And it doesn't matter if it's over on the Northern Yorke Peninsula where we've got ryegrass, brome, radish, bifora, or you know, you throw in your mustards and your muskweeds and things that you've got locally here as well. I'm hoping that the take-home messages are replicable, that you can go and challenge your own clients if you're an agronomist, or take home something that I'm presenting to you today to implement into your own farming system. So I'm also presenting, I initiated a farmer group in 2007 called the Northern Sustainable Soils, and there's a little bit of data in this one from them as well. So for the last 20 odd years, ryegrass has been a major hurdle, and the focus has really changed from post-ems back when hoe grass used to work to pre-ems, and around the turn of the centuries when we started adding triolate to our treflin because the treflin just wasn't working anymore. And now we're getting resistance to the pre-ems as well, so we've really got to change our thinking to how we tackle all these types of weeds, but I'll be concentrating on ryegrass this morning. So we sort of joke that Yorke Peninsula is the only leg that Australia has to stand on, but for those that don't know where it is, it's obviously the Italian-looking peninsula, and I'm based up here at Carina on the Northern Yorke Peninsula. We've probably heard the saying it's a numbers game many times before, but with the advent of resistance to all these types of weeds, and look, we've got really bad brome grass resistance as well, it's really important that we find a lot of cultural or non-chemical means of tackling these issues. And when we say it's all a numbers game, we just want to have the least amount of weed seed set at harvest time or after harvest, so we're dealing with less of a problem the following year. And the most two common practices are crop competition, which I'm going to give you an insight into today, and in the next couple of days you'll hear lots about harvest weed seed management as well. Okay, that graph hasn't quite come onto the screen because there's more under it. I guess with Chris Preston, Peter Bortsalis, and a PhD student called David Brunton, we've been doing a lot of resistance testing. Just a question to the audience, just a show of hands who actually test their ryegrass for resistance. Most of you, yep. And those that put their hand up, who actually tests for pre-emergence? Yeah, a lot less. And so that's where my change of tact has really been. Very commonly we're testing for factor, for clethodim, your IMIs, but we're finding now that our emphasis is really on the pre-ems, and we really want to know what is resistant and you know what is actually useful to us prior to the crop going in. So to give you a bit of a background on this particular trial that we did last year, treflin is, sorry, I don't think I'll use that, you can't really see it. Treflin is basically scun. As we said 20 years ago, we started getting resistance, and it's just kept ticking over. Triolate, the group J's are really where we've, where we've really lost our resistance in the past few years, and both your Avidex, your Triolate, and your Prosulfocarb, which is your Arcade and one of the main actives in Voxa Gold. You know, we're looking at 2/3 the ryegrass there is resistant to Triolate. The good thing is that the Prosulfa carb hasn't changed much, but 30% is still a pretty big number getting through that. In the particular trial site that we had, you'll see here that we tested it at harvest prior to the trial, and also grew out that particular population and tested it again. And the trialate's gone from 50 to completely resistant within one population or one generation of that ryegrass seed. Down underneath, if the chart was on there, like Sakura is 0 and Propismite is 0. So we've still got two bullets up our sleeve for our wheat and our lentils. Not going to touch too much in here, but about 60% of my clients are using a harvest weed seed management tool of one shape or form. And I've really just put that up there to show that it doesn't matter what colour your header is, you can do something out the back of it. So there's chaff decks, chaff lines there. The one up here on the Massey was a single chaff line, but they found some problems out with that, so they actually put a dual chaff line in last harvest. And the one down in the bottom left there is, and actually the son's here in the crowd, so welcome Timo. But they actually developed a system where the chaff was actually put on top of the stubble so that they could get a better burn when they were burning the narrow windrows. Earlier on, they just found the chaff was working its way down to the bottom of the narrow windrow, and the burning wasn't doing as good a job on the weed seeds. So you guys as farmers, and lesser extent the agronomists, are innovators, so there's always things that you can do to increase your weed seed control. So what I was just elaborating on before, this one here, you can see the single chaff line. We had about 40 mils on that particular sand or dune swale system in November last year, and what that happened was it washed down the other wheel marks. So that guy, from a sustainability perspective, just said, no, I don't want a single chaff line on that one wheel. So he developed it to go onto both wheel marks. And you can see Indian hedge mustard there as well. Sometimes you might be targeting ryegrass or brome grass, but you do have collateral benefits of other weeds. So a trial, and obviously done many years ago, but the farmer group, we actually tested, in this case it was chaff cart, the second one from the left, and also narrow windrow burning. And what it came down to with brome grass was that 52% was the number of reduction that we're getting on weed seeds. And what that basically told us that 50% or half the brome wasn't actually making it into the header. So one of the take-home messages on your harvest weed seed management is it all gets back to what's actually coming in the header. They're all really good at processing it as it goes through, but we've got to make sure that the most weed seed comes in the header possible. And that's where my thinking with the trial that I developed last year was about crop competition. How do we actually get the numbers right down as low as possible before it actually goes in the header? So the big six in terms of crop competition, thanks WeedSmart for these, but I think you've all seen these before, so I'm not going to touch on them too long, but increasing seeding rate, decreasing your row spacing, changing to east-west sowing, competitive crops, and that's actually crop type and varieties, time of sowing, and we've actually changed, I guess, the words delayed sowing, because that has a bit of a negative mantra about it, to strategic sowing. So instead of sowing that paddock that might have a problem weed spectrum in it, we go and sow that one. So he goes in a bit later and we just get a better double knock. So it sounds a lot more positive than delayed sowing. And soil health. And I've got down there stacking preems as well, which Tim just touched on. So there's a trial site, and we obviously couldn't do all of those things, but we chose a few of them to put into the trial. And the main ones there were east-west versus north-south. You can see the two orientations there. Coming off lentil stubble, we said, well, normally the rotation goes straight into wheat, and over here sometimes it might go into canola, I'd imagine. What about if we put barley there instead of barley being after the wheat? And then we've got two different varieties of barley, two different varieties of wheat, so non-competitive and competitive, and then our stacked pre-hem options. Question to the crowd again. In terms of sowing orientation, who actually sows east-west for that particular reason? Yep, you don't have to be embarrassed. You can put your hands right up. What about sowing barley on your break crop? So coming off a legume stubble. Yep, a few more hands. So commonly over home, wheat lentil. That's probably changed the last couple of years back into a 3-year rotation with barley coming back into it. And it's coming even more to the fore now with crop competition as we're getting more and more resistant weeds. So 2 sowing orientations, 2 crop types. We had Compass and Spartacus. Spartacus is an interesting one because it's probably a bit divided. Half of people would say it's quite a competitive variety. Over home it isn't unless all things are in its favour. Whereas Compass will just tiller and smother, and Planet Barley is shaping up to be in that very competitive variety line as well. Wheat isn't real competitive full stop, but Scepter is the best of a bad bunch, and Emu Rock, for anyone that's grown that, is pathetic, unfortunately. So it was a good uncompetitive variety for us. And we had untreated, what we called conventional, Treflin and Avedex, and premium. We also snuck a experimental one in, which has only just been called Overwatch. So if you see the word experimental, you'll know it's one of the new chemicals available in 2021 that Peter was talking about. So unsown, untreated, that's the mess that we were facing with. And as I said before, that's now 100% resistant to Avedex and about 30% resistant to Box of Gold. And if anyone wants a really crappy job, go out there and count how many tillers and the spikelets and the panicle numbers. And fortunately, I've got a graduate agronomist under me now, and he's been helping me out. But potentially 87,000 seeds in that. No crop, no chemical. For anyone that's got $300 a head sheep, that probably looks like good feed. Best treatment, east-west sown, that was barley, keeping in mind it's on lentil stubble. Compass, and had the kitchen sink almost thrown at Box of Gold and 2 litres of trilate. So there's potential to go up to 3 litres, of course, but we put 2 litres in. And it looks pretty clean, but there is still grass in there. Worst one, complete opposite. No surprises if you're almost completely resistant to this one and that one. Well, it's almost an untreated plot, isn't it? But you can just see how much grass is still in there and what we'd actually be dealing with at harvest. And there's a bit of a look into it. So you can see, as I was saying with wheat, as soon as you give that ryegrass or radish or brome or whatever it is an inch, it'll take a mile. So there's plenty of sunlight getting in there. It's not competitive, and the ryegrass is sticking out the top. East-west sown barley, yes, there's still some ryegrass in there, but it's spindly, it's not competitive, and the barley's doing a great job of shading it out. So to look at the barley yields, keeping in mind on lentil stubble again, last year was sort of decile 1 growing season. So the yields that we've got here are probably about average for the Parsceville district, but the lentils, being a short-rooted crop, didn't tap into the moisture that was carrying through from the year before. So there was good subsoil moisture that the barley tapped into. So working from left to right, and when you're looking at it, blue is north-south sown, orange is east-west. We've got the Compass and Spartacus Nil treatments sitting at about 3.8 tonnes. As soon as we added a bit of chemical, Treflin and Avadex, jumped up into the low 4s, and then the premium stacked treatments, these two here, jumped up about another half a tonne up into the high 4s. The other thing you'll notice is that there was very little, and it proved to be non-significant difference between the sowing orientation in the barley. But what you would find here is that the Compass, as soon as you started stacking some of these practices together, it started out yielding the Spartacus well and truly. By the time we added the premium pre-emergence, so it was about half a tonne in front. And this one here is your Overwatch, which was just on the Compass, but yeah, again, another step up because it had better ryegrass control. So overall, we had a 1.3 tonne improvement by putting all those things together. And last year, what was barley, 300 plus bucks a tonne, so pretty handy improvement financially as well to the grower. Wheat, same colours for your north, south and east, west. And again, first two are untreated, next two are Treflin Avadex, and then you've got your Sakura Avadex. So you find that the better we control the grass, the higher the yield again, and the experimental, exceptionally good, 3.7 tonne. But the big difference there is that you note the orientation difference. And it didn't matter whether it was Scepter or Emu Rock, there was roughly half a tonne difference across the whole lot. So each treatment and each variety, we had roughly half a tonne just by changing that orientation. So it just shows that wheat is so uncompetitive that you help it by just shading out some of the weeds, and then you add some of these other things in, like a more competitive variety and a better pre-em package, and yeah, you really do get an economic response. So I look at it that in terms of expenditure, putting another variety in really doesn't cost anything. Changing your sowing orientation doesn't either. However, granted, those on controlled traffic would be loath to change theirs around if you're already set up on north-south. And we also have a lot of dune swale systems over on the peninsula, and just logistically it's better to go east-west to get up and over those sandhills. So there are, I'm not going to stand up here and say you must change your orientation, because there are times when you just logistically can't. But it definitely does give you some insight into what can be done with wheat. Lots of data up there, but look, I just wanted to show you, second one down, you can just see that Compass and Spartacus, east-west, north-south, there was very little difference between them, 4.17 and 4.3. Whereas as soon as you got down to the next one under, Scepter and Emu Rock, 2.7 became 3.2 and 2.3 became 2.9, just by changing that orientation. And then I've just teased it apart a little bit more, but for the sake of time, I won't go through that. Again, I'll just explain it quickly. On the axis there, it's actually a log of the ryegrass population, because if I put 87,000 down to where we got it, down to 800 potential seeds, the graph would have a little blip on it here and be as high as the roof with the 87,000. So it's a log scale, but it just shows you that with the barley and the wheat, that the less ryegrass you have, the higher the yield comes up. So with the wheat here, going from 2 up to 3.8. So get on top of your ryegrass, and that means dollars. So fast forward a year, this is the trial site at the start of this year, and stating the obvious, really, ryegrass isn't a one-year fix. You can just see the emu rock plots back there and how green they are. You can see the experimental line here. As I said, it's called Overwatch, looking really good in comparison to the others, but there's still a lot of ryegrass in that plot that's come up. The buffer's untreated, so hence why that's so green. And the scepter with the Sakura and Avidex doesn't look too bad there either. And to look around the trial, looking back the other way, we chemically fallowed, I think it was 3 times for the year, like around the trial site. That's obviously worked because there's not much grass that's come up there. And the client actually cut the wheat in the rest of the paddock down for hay because the ryegrass escape was just not sustainable. So it just gives evidence that if this is what we've normally done, we're obviously not going to leave it but that's how messy a paddock could be. But 2 of the other options, chemical fallow and cutting down for hay, are really good non-selective, I'll call it, means of getting that grass down. So that was a pretty good photo, I thought, visually showing what could have been versus other options. And again, just doing weed seed counts, a lot less this time. 87,000's become sort of just under 4,000. But the same trend was still occurring, that your Overwatch here had very low numbers. Your premium treatments were roughly the same, but the north-south, this is in the barley again, north-south actually set more seed and there was more ryegrass plants per square metre in that particular orientation in the barley. And that didn't actually read true with the yield, but obviously the barley yielded the same, but it still set more ryegrass. And the wheat, we did differently as well. We actually did green seeker treatments because that, as you saw in that photo, there was visual differences in the amount of ryegrass plants. And again, it just read true, and it was significant. Like the emu rock that had no chemical at all was exceptionally high. And then, right down to your premium treatments that had a low green seeker result. So it just backs up that what we measured and what we saw in the field in the trial last year has carried through into ryegrass plants per square metre this year. I'm lucky that I deal with a group of really proactive farmers, and several of them actually took that data and put it into paddock size. A lot of cases it was whole paddocks, but the odd one likes his yield mapping and biomass imagery and whatever, and he's actually done his own trial. So this one's actually on the back of canola. I think I only had 3 canola paddocks in my whole group last year because it's a big lentil area, but same thing, call it a break crop. It was filthy with ryegrass, and you can just see up the top compass barley really starting to smother the grass, the Trojan wheat quite poor, and it really showed up in the biomass here. Blue's obviously better than yellow, green or turquoise is in between. He went one step further and actually had a different variety of maize, different variety of wheat, in there as well. And you can just see, from a biomass perspective, the compass is the best of the lot, and Trojan is not as competitive as what the maize is. And I've just got a comment there that if barley drops back to a low level, do we still continue with that? But I think now, in some terms, you've got to look at financial reasons after agronomic reasons, because as they say, like the most expensive chemical's the one that's not going to work. There's the Trojan and Scepter a bit later on, about a month later, with the biomass. Trojan started to catch the mace. If you're wondering what this line is here, that's just an old fence line. But you can still draw a line basically through, not as much probably here, but definitely over on that old paddock. between the Trojan and the maize for biomass. And apologies again, that graph hasn't, that chart hasn't come out, but I've done plant counts, tiller counts, and I'll probably do seed counts, or get the great agronomist to do seed counts later on. But it just showed the big difference there, that just crop choice in Compass versus Trojan, and the Scepter was better than the Trojan for plant numbers and tiller numbers, but just that one choice. And obviously we haven't used Sakura on the barley, that's been Box of Gold. So there's been a different preem, but yeah, as I showed you with that previous one, the barley up there is just far more competitive than the wheat. How are we going for time, Gurley? Good, yep. I wasn't sure if I'd get this far in terms of my presentation, but just in terms of soil health, show of hands again, because I love asking questions to the audience. Who adopts like biomass imagery, like Decipher, Ag World? Show of hands, yep. I reckon it's fascinating. Obviously, it's a beautiful coloured map, and you've got to go and ground truth it, but in a lot of instances, it does pose more questions, and in particular to crop competition. In this case, I've just looked at a dark green, light green and brown spot, and no surprises that the best figure was up in the dark green, and then we've got 3/4 of the paddock in the brown, which is looking quite poorly. And when you actually go and ground truth it, and I've just used a simple app to get the ground cover results, but if you're a ryegrass, you'd much rather be growing in this one here, wouldn't you, than that one up there. So my challenge to that particular client was, how do we get this here, which is 75% of the paddock, looking more like, well, the top one would be ideal. So that in terms of soil health, that just correlates straight into crop vigour, crop competition, and the wheel turns around again. So we're trying now, focusing on getting our crops as competitive as we can early, without going overboard, of course. Like in our sense at the moment, it's like if you just piled a heap of nitrogen or nutrient into a crop to get it healthy, well, you probably would have tipped it over and it would be running out of moisture at a rate of knots. But as I've got with the emoji here, it's just something else to think of, that soil health definitely has a big fit for competing with weeds. So there's my take-home messages. Just an interesting photo from the trial plot as well. You can see barley, how competitive, like it has that ability to be laterally competitive, I call it, into the interrow. Wheat genetically really hasn't got that ability to tiller, but I know the GRDC are looking at higher biomass wheats, or competitive wheats, they're calling them. And similarly, you give a ryegrass plant that inch and it does take a mile, and yeah, there'll be a couple of hundred seeds at least on that particular plant. So take home, try to add as many of those 1% as I call them, without sounding like a footy coach and talking about smothers and shepherds and hardball gets and whatever else. It's the same in farming. If we can implement those 1%ers at sowing, and then a few more at harvest time, and add on all these other things that Peter and Tim have already talked about, that's the way that we really start exhausting our weed seed bank in the soil. There's a fit for east-west sowing, but the response may not be as high in barley as it is in wheat. My challenge this year is actually to put that same trial into a wheat stubble rather than lentil stubble, and I think that the barley will, just with that change of orientation, will really stand out again there. And the reason I say that is with a lentil base, lots of nitrogen, lots of water, and the difference in orientation didn't really show up. Wheat needs more extra help, or more 1%ers, just due to its lack of competition. And look, it's already been said, but the new pre-emergent chemistry, the Luximos, the Overwatches, are not going to be the silver bullet, but they're definitely going to help us. We've just got to protect them and ensure their longevity is here for a lot longer than, say, the Box of Golds of the world, beautiful chemical, but we're already starting to exhaust it on York Peninsula. And agronomically, I try to ensure that my clients, the last thing they choose is the pre-em. We try to make sure that all these other things are in place or implemented, and then we choose the pre-em. And particularly the Group J's, the Avadex or Triolates, and your Prosulfocarb products, like make sure you stack them together. You're just going to have a far better result. And as I said, it might be dearer, but the most expensive chemical is the one that just doesn't work or you lose crop yield with due to competition. So I'll end it there. Thanks to all that crew up there. Thanks for having me, and I'll hand it back to Kira Lee.
Thanks very much, Chris.